Hearing from some of our producers on the ground, as you mentioned, that some of the original free speech, self-described conservatives that were on the stage that have now been removed, or not, they've removed themselves off the stage. It's as if law enforcement officers are actually trying to put them on wagons and remove them from that scene. Whether or not that's because that's just the sheer number of counter-protesters, it's that they obviously are trying to prevent any violence. We're working to get our reporter on the phone, as you can imagine. It's fairly hard to get a signal out at this time, but that's sort of the word that we're getting. And when we spoke with Ed Davis earlier, that law enforcement was prepared to do anything possible to prevent violence, whether or not that was remove people from the scene, whether or not that was for the riot gear to come out, like you had mentioned. And we've seen these lines while you were talking to Doug. We saw the law enforcement in riot gear physically, which they are now, physically pushing people back, which is where you start to see it get a little bit more tense, but they'll do anything they need to do to prevent.
And when you look at these crowds, and I don't know if Doug has these images in front of him, but in some ways, these, as we heard from Steve Harrigan, the Antifa and the sort of angry, violent Black Lives Matter groups, it doesn't appear as though the police are trying to protect any protesters. It seems as though the protesters have now turned on the police. And you saw that guy out in front begin to taunt some of the police. And now there's this pushing and shoving between groups and police officers, not over any other protesters. This is about the police, and you can see them now taking, beginning to take people into custody there. Right. This is a very different police response than what we saw in the beginning. And also, Doug makes a good point that this is a very different police response than what we saw in Charlottesville. There was not a lot of leash given to these protesters.